For centuries, science and philosophy have collided over a single, seemingly unsolvable problem: what exactly produces subjective experience? The dominant materialist model treats consciousness as a byproduct, the acoustic noise generated by billions of neurons firing in the wetware of the human brain. In this framework, when the hardware degrades, the noise simply stops. The opposing model treats the mind as an independent entity, an eternal essence that briefly inhabits the body, then detaches and persists once the physical form fails. Both paradigms share a structural error. They assume consciousness must be a physical object or a supernatural ghost. They overlook the physics of continuous patterns. Consider a vortex in a river. The water molecules making up the spiral are replaced every millisecond. The whirlpool does not contain a permanent collection of matter, yet it possesses a distinct geometry, philosophy, and measurable mass. Consciousness follows this fluid principle. It is the specific, localized geometry of energy flowing through the human nervous system. To accurately model consciousness, we have to rely on pure wave mechanics. Subjective identity is a localized standing wave operating within a universal field of potential. A traveling wave carries energy outward, constantly dispersing. A standing wave oscillates at fixed locations. Reflecting between boundaries, it interferes constructively, maintaining structure without dissipating. The human body provides the material anchor to organize these harmonic frequencies and maintain this standing wave. Within this physical framework, biological death is a localized thermodynamic failure. It occurs when the hardware loses the capacity to correct phase errors. The constructive interference breaks down, and the standing wave collapses back into background noise. If mortality is the mechanical failure of wave maintenance, then surviving the death of the physical body becomes a possibility governed by the rigorous laws of wave mechanics. To understand how a standing wave of consciousness persists, we have to define the medium it waves through. Space itself is not an empty void. Modern quantum field theory identifies the vacuum, the plenum, as a dense, infinitely fluctuating field of potential energy. At every coordinate in the universe, virtual particles constantly phase in and out of existence. This schematic demonstrates the Casimir effect, proving that this background energy field exerts measurable physical force. When two uncharged plates are placed micrometers apart in a vacuum, they are pushed together. Because the microscopic gap restricts the wavelengths of virtual particles that can form between the plates, an asymmetry is created. The energy density outside the plates exceeds the density inside, generating physical pressure. The particles making up human biology follow this exact architecture. Electrons, photons, and the brain matter they compose are localized excitations of these underlying fields. Matter and mind are the field itself, folded into highly organized local patterns. The background field is eternal. The individual self is fragile. Surviving biological death relies entirely on maintaining the specific geometry of that local pattern. What specific geometry allows a flow pattern to sustain itself in a dynamic, chaotic environment without continuous external support? Nature uses the toroidal vortex, the donut shape, to minimize energy dissipation. A toroid is self-feeding. As energy exits the top and curves downward along the outer edge, the outflow creates the exact pressure gradient required to draw it back into the center, forming a self-perpetuating loop. We can observe the extreme stability of this geometry in Jupiter's Great Red Spot, a vortex that has maintained its structural integrity for hundreds of years against the violent turbulence of the planet's atmosphere. Human consciousness requires this same physical fault tolerance. To maintain continuous identity across time, the mind's architecture must organize itself into this precise shape. The subjective self is a continuously cycling toroidal standing wave, holding its geometry against the surrounding noise of the plenum. The primary threat to this highly structured geometry is the second law of thermodynamics. Formulated by physicists like Ludwig Boltzmann, the law states that any isolated system will mathematically bias towards disorder. Because there are more ways for particles to be disorganized than ordered, an unmaintained pattern inevitably breaks down. For a standing wave, entropy acts as continuous noise. It introduces phase errors, disrupting the perfect constructive interference required to keep the structure intact. This thermodynamic degradation is constantly occurring within the human nervous system. This diagram illustrates the default mode network, the brain's primary generator of internal entropy. This network produces the constant stream of psychological rumination, anxiety, and internal conflict that characterize everyday thought. This self-referential cognitive noise dissipates enormous amounts of energy. It generates internal friction that distorts the precise symmetry of the individual's toroidal wave. Biological aging and death occur because the entropy generated by the default mode network accumulates faster than the body's hardware can repair the phase errors. The standing wave is shaken apart from the inside. The second law of thermodynamics dictates absolute degradation, but it applies strictly to isolated, closed systems. The human organism is an open system. It constantly exchanges energy and matter with its external environment. Physics mathematically permits an open system to increase its internal order, lowering its internal entropy, as long as it exports disorder to its environment at a faster rate. By systematically training the nervous system to silence the chaotic noise of the default mode network, an individual drastically reduces the amount of internal entropy they generate. Achieving internal neurological silence allows the body to function as an entropatically efficient stabilizer for the standing wave. The target state for the human system is resonant frequency. A system hits resonance when its internal organization is so efficient that the entropy it generates is perfectly matched by what it exports. It requires absolute minimal energy to maintain its shape. When this precise level of neurological resonance is achieved, the toroidal standing wave becomes completely self-sustaining. Once the pattern's energy loop is closed through perfect resonance, the outflow of information is perfectly captured as inflow. The vortex stabilizes into a self-referential knot in the vacuum, no longer requiring the coarse material scaffolding of neurons to prevent decoherence. Persistence depends on a specific thermodynamic achievement, the stabilization of the pattern against background noise. Physical existence is a temporary, finite gymnasium. The sole biological imperative is to stabilize your conscious geometry into a self-sustaining vortex before the hardware inevitably fails.